Most people don't realize that their ordinary days are quietly shaped by an invisible force they rarely question. They wake up, move through routines, react to events, and fall asleep believing that life is happening to them, rather than through them. Yet beneath every experience, money gained or lost, relationships that flourish or fade, health that strengthens or weakens, there is a subtle attitude guiding outcomes. That attitude is often so familiar it feels neutral, but it is anything but. It is the difference between feeling supported by life and feeling at odds with it. Once this hidden force is brought into awareness, everything begins to shift in ways that feel almost uncanny. At the heart of this idea is the understanding that life responds not only to actions, but to inner recognition. When people focus constantly on what is missing, unfair, or disappointing, they unknowingly reinforce the same patterns. The mind becomes trained to scan for lack, and the world seems to comply. On the other hand, when attention is trained to notice what is already working, already supportive, already meaningful, the experience of life softens. Opportunities appear more easily. Problems feel less heavy. This is not blind optimism or pretending difficulties do not exist. It is a recalibration of focus, a deliberate shift from resistance to cooperation with life itself. Gratitude is often misunderstood as a polite response or a moral virtue, something one expresses after receiving something good. But its deeper role is far more practical. Gratitude functions like an internal signal that says, "This matters. This is valuable. This is enough to acknowledge." When this signal becomes consistent, it changes the way the mind interprets reality. Instead of filtering for threats and shortcomings, it begins to recognize support, abundance, and possibility. This shift is not poetic metaphor, it directly influences decisions, behavior, and emotional resilience. Consider how the mind behaves when appreciation is absent. Small inconveniences feel like personal attacks. Delays become sources of irritation. Other people's actions are interpreted through suspicion. Energy drains quickly, and motivation weakens. Now contrast that with a mind trained to appreciate. Delays become pauses. Challenges become information. Even setbacks carry lessons instead of shame. The external events may be identical, but the internal experience, and therefore the outcome, is radically different. What makes this approach powerful is its consistency. Gratitude is not treated as a momentary feeling but as a daily practice that reshapes perception. When practiced intentionally, it brings unconscious patterns to the surface. People begin to notice how often they complain without realizing it, how frequently they focus on what they want to escape rather than what they want to grow. This awareness alone is transformative. It creates a pause between stimulus and reaction, allowing choice where there was once habit. One of the most subtle shifts occurs in relationships. Many relationships struggle not because of major betrayals, but because appreciation slowly disappears. Familiarity replaces wonder. Expectations replace curiosity. When attention is returned to what initially drew two people together, qualities, gestures, shared moments, emotional warmth begins to return. Even strained relationships can soften when one person quietly changes the lens through which they see the other. Gratitude does not excuse harmful behavior, but it prevents unnecessary emotional escalation and opens the door to understanding. The same principle applies to work and money. People often approach these areas with anxiety, frustration, or a sense of inadequacy. They think motivation comes from pressure or dissatisfaction. In reality, appreciation for current resources creates a stable foundation for growth. When someone values their skills, opportunities, and progress, even if imperfect, they naturally make better decisions. Confidence grows not from pretending success, but from recognizing effort and progress that already exist. Health, too, responds to this internal environment. When the body is viewed as an enemy or a constant problem to fix, stress becomes chronic. When it is viewed as an ally doing its best under given conditions, care becomes gentler and more consistent. Appreciation for the body's functions, even when imperfect, reduces internal resistance. This shift does not replace medical care or discipline, but it supports healing by lowering emotional friction. What makes gratitude uniquely effective is that it works in the present moment. It does not require waiting for circumstances to change. In fact, its power lies in being practiced precisely when circumstances are imperfect. This is where it feels counterintuitive, even uncomfortable. The mind protests, insisting that appreciation should come after improvement. But the deeper insight is that appreciation creates the mental state from which improvement becomes possible. Over time, this practice changes how desires are experienced. Instead of longing filled with tension and impatience, desires become calm intentions. There is less desperation and more trust. This emotional neutrality is often mistaken for passivity, but it is actually clarity. Actions taken from this state are more aligned, less reactive, and more sustainable. As this way of living settles in, life begins to feel less like a battle and more like a dialogue. Events are no longer interpreted solely as obstacles or rewards, but as responses. This does not mean everything becomes easy or pleasant. Challenges still arise, losses still occur, but the inner response is steadier. There is a sense that even difficult moments carry information rather than punishment. Perhaps the most profound realization is that gratitude is not about being satisfied with less. It is about recognizing value so clearly that growth becomes natural instead of forced. It removes the constant sense of insufficiency that drives exhaustion. Instead of chasing fulfillment, fulfillment becomes a companion on the journey. As this understanding deepens, a question naturally begins to form. If gratitude has the power to reshape perception, relationships, work, health, and emotional stability, what happens when it is applied deliberately to every part of daily life? Not as a vague idea, but as a structured, intentional practice woven into ordinary moments. The answer to that question opens the door to a more deliberate. There comes a moment when appreciation stops feeling like a pleasant idea and starts feeling like a discipline. This is usually when people realize that their mind does not naturally drift toward gratitude at all. It drifts toward comparison, worry, replaying conversations, and rehearsing future problems. This realization can be unsettling, but it is also empowering. Once you see how automatic your mental habits are, you understand that a different inner experience is not a matter of personality or luck, but of training. And like any meaningful training, it begins with repetition in small, ordinary moments. The practice deepens when gratitude becomes specific. Vague appreciation has limited impact. Saying, "I'm thankful for my life," sounds nice, but it barely touches the nervous system. Specific appreciation, on the other hand, anchors awareness in reality. When attention is placed on a particular conversation that went well, a meal that nourished you, a task completed, or a moment of quiet that restored you, the mind engages fully. It is no longer floating in abstraction. It is grounded. This grounding is what allows appreciation to influence mood, behavior, and perception in real time. As this specificity grows, something interesting begins to happen. The mind starts to search for things to appreciate, not out of obligation, but because it feels better to do so. This is a crucial turning point. Gratitude stops being an effort and starts becoming a preference. The internal environment becomes calmer, and from that calm, insight emerges more easily. Problems are still recognized, but they are no longer magnified by emotional noise. This shift also reveals how much emotional energy has been wasted on resistance. Resistance to traffic, to emails, to other people's moods, to circumstances that cannot be changed in the moment. Each form of resistance tightens the body and narrows perception. Appreciation, even for something neutral or mildly positive within an unpleasant situation, loosens that grip. It does not deny reality. It simply refuses to add unnecessary suffering to it. Money is one of the areas where this resistance is most deeply ingrained. Many people think about money with a background hum of anxiety or dissatisfaction, regardless of how much they have. Bills feel heavy. Income feels insufficient. Comparison quietly erodes contentment. When appreciation is introduced here, it initially feels unnatural. But acknowledging money as a tool that has supported shelter, food, experiences, and opportunities changes the emotional tone. Instead of viewing money as proof of lack or stress, it becomes evidence of exchange and support. This subtle reframing often leads to more respectful, thoughtful financial decisions. Work follows a similar pattern. People often focus on what they dislike about their jobs while overlooking what the work provides: structure, learning, connection, contribution. Appreciation does not mean ignoring unfairness or settling for less than one's potential. It means recognizing the value that exists now, which prevents bitterness from poisoning motivation. From this state, change becomes strategic rather than impulsive. People leave jobs not out of resentment, but clarity. As appreciation becomes habitual, emotional reactions slow down. There is more space between an event and the story told about it. A comment that once felt insulting may now be seen as careless rather than malicious. A delay that once triggered frustration may be interpreted as an opportunity to pause. This does not mean emotions disappear. It means they pass through without dominating the entire inner landscape. One of the quieter transformations occurs in how the past is remembered. Many people carry unresolved resentment or regret, replaying moments they wish had gone differently. Appreciation does not rewrite history, but it changes the relationship with it. Past experiences are re-examined for what they taught, how they strengthened awareness, or how they redirected life in meaningful ways. Even painful memories begin to lose their sharp edges when meaning is extracted from them. This naturally affects how the future is imagined. Instead of anticipating problems by default, the mind becomes open to favorable outcomes. This openness does not guarantee specific results, but it changes posture. There is less bracing, less defensiveness. Planning becomes clearer because it is not driven by fear. Vision expands because it is not constrained by habitual pessimism. As the practice matures, gratitude is no longer limited to positive events. It begins to include challenges, not because they are enjoyable, but because they reveal strength, patience, or values. This is where appreciation reaches this level of gratitude has a stabilizing effect during uncertainty. When outcomes are unclear, appreciation for the present moment prevents spiraling. It anchors attention in what is real and available now, rather than what might go wrong later. This anchoring preserves energy, allowing more thoughtful responses when action is required. Over time, this way of living creates an internal consistency. External circumstances fluctuate, but the inner tone remains steady. This steadiness is often mistaken for emotional detachment, but it is actually emotional maturity. It allows joy without clinging and sorrow without collapse. Life is experienced more fully because it is not constantly filtered through judgment. Eventually, gratitude stops feeling like something you do and starts feeling like who you are. It shapes how you listen, how you speak, how you interpret silence, and how you move through ordinary days. It becomes the quiet foundation beneath ambition, rest, connection, and growth. And yet, even here, another question arises. If appreciation can transform inner experience so deeply, what happens when it is directed intentionally toward what is currently unwanted, unresolved, or avoided? What changes when gratitude is applied not only to what feels safe to appreciate, but to what has been resisted the most? That question leads into a deeper and more confronting exploration. There is a natural hesitation that arises when appreciation is directed toward what has been avoided, delayed, or quietly resented. The mind immediately objects. It insists that some experiences do not deserve gratitude, that acknowledging them would somehow validate pain or injustice. This reaction is understandable, but it comes from a misunderstanding. Appreciation is not approval. It is recognition. It is the willingness to see what is present without the added weight of resistance. When this distinction becomes clear, a deeper layer of inner freedom begins to open. Unwanted situations tend to consume a disproportionate amount of mental energy. They linger in the background of thought, shaping mood and behavior even when they are not actively addressed. Avoidance feels like protection, but it often turns into silent tension. When appreciation is gently introduced here, not for the discomfort itself but for what it reveals, the tension loosens. Awareness expands. Instead of pushing the experience away, the mind becomes curious about it. This curiosity changes everything. A difficult conversation avoided for months may suddenly be seen as an opportunity for honesty. A personal flaw that caused shame may be reframed as a signpost pointing toward growth. Even failure, when examined through appreciation, becomes information rather than identity. It shows where alignment was missing, where assumptions were inaccurate, or where preparation was incomplete. This reframing restores a sense of agency. One of the most transformative applications of appreciation is toward emotions themselves. Many people judge their emotional responses harshly. They label certain feelings as weaknesses or problems to eliminate. Anxiety, sadness, jealousy, and anger are often treated as enemies. When appreciation enters this relationship, emotions are no longer rejected. They are understood as signals. Anxiety may point to misalignment or lack of clarity. Sadness may indicate a need for rest or closure. Anger may reveal crossed boundaries or unmet values. Appreciating emotions does not mean indulging them, it means listening without condemnation. This shift has a powerful effect on self-trust. When inner experiences are no longer suppressed or criticized, confidence grows naturally. Decisions become clearer because they are informed by a fuller understanding of internal signals. There is less internal conflict, less second-guessing. Life feels more coherent because the inner and outer worlds are no longer at odds. Appreciation also changes how mistakes are processed in real time. Instead of spiraling into self-blame, there is a quicker return to equilibrium. The mistake is acknowledged, learned from, and integrated. Energy is conserved. Momentum is preserved. This creates a learning-oriented mindset rather than a performance-oriented one. Progress becomes steady instead of fragile. As this mindset stabilizes, a subtle form of courage emerges. People become more willing to take thoughtful risks, not because they expect guaranteed success, but because they trust themselves to learn and adapt. Appreciation for effort, intention, and growth replaces obsession with outcome. This shift often leads to better results, not because of force, but because of consistency and resilience. Even uncertainty begins to feel different. When the future is unclear, the mind usually rushes to fill the gap with worst-case scenarios. Appreciation interrupts this reflex. By grounding attention in what is currently stable, known, or supportive, uncertainty loses its edge. It becomes a space of possibility rather than threat. This emotional neutrality allows patience, which is often the missing ingredient in wise decision-making. There is also a profound social effect. When appreciation is practiced internally, it naturally extends outward. Conversations become less defensive and more attentive. Listening improves because the mind is not preoccupied with judgment. Disagreements become explorations rather than battles. Even when boundaries are necessary, they are communicated with clarity instead of hostility. This tends to invite respect rather than resistance. Over time, appreciation reshapes identity. Instead of defining oneself by roles, achievements, or struggles, identity becomes rooted in awareness and responsiveness. There is a quiet confidence that does not need constant validation. Success is enjoyed without arrogance. What makes this transformation sustainable is its simplicity. It does not require withdrawal from life or dramatic changes in circumstance. It is practiced in ordinary moments, while waiting, listening, choosing, and responding. Each moment of appreciation is small, but their cumulative effect is substantial. Over time, they reshape the inner narrative that determines how life is experienced. Eventually, appreciation becomes less about improving life and more about meeting it fully. There is less urgency to escape discomfort and more capacity to move through it intelligently. Pleasure is enjoyed without clinging. Difficulty is faced without despair. Life feels richer because it is no longer filtered through constant resistance. At this stage, a deeper realization begins to surface. Appreciation is not merely a mental habit, it is a way of relating to existence itself. It is a posture of cooperation rather than control. And once this posture is established, a new question quietly emerges. If inner experience can be shaped so profoundly through attention and recognition, what happens when appreciation is paired with deliberate intention? How does life respond when clarity of desire meets an open, receptive inner state? That exploration leads into an even more expansive understanding. When intention is introduced into a mind already softened by appreciation, something subtle but powerful begins to take shape. Desire no longer feels like tension or longing. It becomes direction. Instead of pulling the mind into the future with impatience, intention anchors it in clarity. This clarity is not forceful. It is quiet, almost understated, yet deeply effective. It allows a person to know what they want without being emotionally dependent on when or how it arrives. Most people struggle with intention because it is entangled with anxiety. They want outcomes to fix discomfort, prove worth, or escape uncertainty. When appreciation has already stabilized the inner world, intention arises from a very different place. It comes from curiosity, creativity, and alignment rather than lack. This difference changes how goals are held. They become invitations rather than demands. This shift is especially noticeable in decision-making. Instead of rushing toward outcomes, there is more patience with process. Actions are chosen because they feel coherent, not because they promise immediate relief. When setbacks occur, they are evaluated calmly rather than taken personally. This emotional neutrality allows adjustments without discouragement. Progress becomes iterative instead of dramatic, which paradoxically makes it more reliable. As intention becomes clearer, attention naturally follows. The mind begins to notice resources, connections, and information that were previously overlooked. This is not because reality has suddenly changed, but because perception has become more selective and refined. When intention is vague, attention scatters. When intention is clear, attention organizes itself. This is how seemingly unlikely opportunities begin to appear at the right moments. What is often described as luck or coincidence is frequently the result of this alignment. A conversation overheard, a book discovered, a person met unexpectedly. These moments feel random, but they occur more often when the mind is receptive rather than tense. Appreciation keeps the nervous system relaxed enough to notice what is already present. Intention gives direction to what is noticed. This dynamic also influences effort. When intention is aligned, effort feels focused instead of draining. There is less pushing and more follow-through. Work done from this state carries a different quality. It is attentive, responsive, and adaptive. Even when challenges arise, energy is not immediately depleted because effort is not fueled by frustration. One of the most misunderstood aspects of intention is the idea of control. Many assume that setting intention means trying to manage outcomes. In reality, the most effective intentions are flexible. They define direction without rigid attachment. This flexibility allows unexpected paths to be recognized as valid, sometimes even superior. Appreciation plays a crucial role here by preventing disappointment from closing perception prematurely. Over time, a rhythm develops between inner clarity and external feedback. Actions are taken, results are observed, adjustments are made. This rhythm feels natural rather than forced. There is a sense of collaboration with circumstances rather than opposition. Life feels less like a problem to solve and more like a process to engage with intelligently. This approach also transforms how waiting is experienced. Waiting no longer feels like stagnation or failure. It becomes a period of integration and refinement. Appreciation for the present moment prevents impatience from distorting judgment. Intention quietly holds direction while allowing timing to unfold. This balance reduces impulsive decisions that often create unnecessary complications. As this way of living stabilizes, trust begins to replace urgency. Trust not in guarantees, but in responsiveness, the confidence that adjustments can be made as new information appears. This trust makes people more resilient in the face of uncertainty. They are less likely to cling to plans that are no longer viable and more willing to pivot when conditions change. Relationships are also affected by this pairing of appreciation and intention. Instead of trying to control how others behave or respond, people become clearer about how they choose to show up. Communication becomes more honest because it is less driven by fear of outcome. Boundaries become easier to maintain because they are guided by self-respect rather than resentment. Gradually, intention stops being something consciously rehearsed and becomes a background orientation. It informs choices without. At this stage, life begins to feel unusually responsive. Not because everything goes according to plan, but because inner alignment reduces friction. Setbacks still occur, but recovery is faster. Success still requires effort, but it feels earned rather than exhausting. There is a growing sense that life is not resisting, but responding. This realization naturally invites a final inquiry. If appreciation stabilizes the inner world and intention provides direction, what happens when both are practiced consistently over time? How does identity change when this becomes the default way of engaging with life rather than a temporary experiment? The answer to that question reveals the deepest shift of all, one that moves beyond techniques and into a fundamentally different. When appreciation and intention are no longer treated as tools but as ways of being, identity itself begins to soften. People often think of identity as something fixed, shaped by history, personality, and circumstance. But when inner alignment becomes consistent, identity reveals itself to be far more fluid. It is no longer built around constant striving or defense. Instead, it forms around responsiveness, presence, and trust in one's ability to meet life as it unfolds. This shift is subtle at first. There is simply less internal commentary, fewer mental arguments, less need to justify choices or prove worth. Silence becomes comfortable rather than awkward. In that silence, intuition becomes easier to hear. Decisions feel less like calculations and more like recognitions. This is not impulsiveness. It is clarity that emerges when mental noise subsides. With this clarity comes a different relationship to success. Success is no longer used to stabilize self-esteem. It is appreciated when it arrives and released when it passes. The same is true for failure. It loses its power to define identity. It becomes feedback, nothing more. This emotional flexibility allows people to engage more fully in their work and relationships because they are no longer protecting an image. Time is experienced differently as well. The constant sense of being behind or racing ahead begins to dissolve. Attention returns to what is happening now, not as a forced mindfulness exercise, but as a natural consequence of reduced inner conflict. When the mind is not preoccupied with regret or anticipation, presence becomes effortless. This presence has a grounding effect on the body. Stress responses soften, breathing deepens, energy becomes more evenly distributed rather than spiking and crashing. People often notice they sleep better, listen more attentively, and recover more quickly from emotional strain. These are not dramatic transformations, but cumulative ones that quietly improve quality of life. Perhaps the most meaningful change occurs in how life's unpredictability is met. Instead of trying to control outcomes, there is a willingness to cooperate with uncertainty. This does not mean passivity. It means engaging without excessive attachment. When plans change, the adjustment is quicker. When losses occur, grief is allowed without becoming identity. When opportunities arise, they are explored without fear of inadequacy. At this level, appreciation extends beyond circumstances and becomes existential. There is a quiet recognition of being alive at all, of having perception, movement, and choice. This recognition does not eliminate hardship, but it provides a stable ground beneath it. Even in difficult moments, there is a sense that something fundamental remains intact. Intention, now deeply integrated, functions less as goal setting and more as orientation. It guides values rather than outcomes. People become clearer about how they want to relate to others, how they want to use their energy, and what they want to prioritize. This clarity simplifies life. Many unnecessary commitments fall away. What remains feels meaningful rather than obligatory. As this simplicity grows, generosity often follows. When inner resources feel sufficient, sharing becomes natural. Attention, patience, kindness, and support are offered without calculation. This generosity is not self-sacrificial. It is an overflow. It tends to strengthen relationships and create environments where others also feel more at ease. One of the quiet paradoxes of this way of living is that effort often increases even as struggle decreases. People work diligently, but without the constant friction of self-doubt. They care deeply, but without emotional exhaustion. Ambition remains, but it is aligned with values rather than driven by comparison. This alignment makes persistence sustainable. Over time, life begins to feel less fragmented. Work, relationships, health, and inner life are no longer experienced as competing domains. They inform and support each other. Choices made in one area resonate positively in others. This coherence creates a sense of wholeness that is difficult to articulate but easy to feel. Eventually, there is a realization that nothing dramatic needs to happen for life to feel meaningful. Meaning arises from engagement, from attention, from the way moments are met. Appreciation keeps the heart open. Intention keeps direction clear. Together, they create a life that feels deliberate without being rigid, purposeful without being tense. This is not an ending, but a stabilization. The practice does not conclude, it continues and in that recognition, something settles. Life no longer feels like a problem waiting to be solved. It feels like a conversation, one that responds to presence, honesty, and care. The magic was never hidden in extraordinary moments or distant achievements. It was always embedded in attention, waiting to be practiced, moment by. As this way of living settles in, there is often a quiet surprise. The sense of searching that once drove so many decisions begins to fade. Not because every desire has been fulfilled, but because the relationship with desire itself has changed. Wanting no longer feels like an emergency. It feels like a preference held lightly. This shift frees an enormous amount of mental and emotional energy that was previously spent chasing, worrying, or comparing. With that energy reclaimed, attention turns naturally toward depth rather than accumulation. Experiences are no longer rushed through in the hope that the next one will feel more complete. Conversations are listened to more fully. Simple routines carry a subtle richness. Even repetition stops feeling dull because presence brings nuance to familiar moments. Life does not become smaller, it becomes more textured. There is also a noticeable change in how inner dialogue unfolds. The voice that once criticized, rushed, or doubted loses its authority. It may still appear, but it is recognized as noise rather than truth. Appreciation has weakened its grip by shifting focus away from constant evaluation. Intention has given direction without aggression. Together, they create an inner atmosphere where self-talk becomes more neutral, sometimes even kind. This atmosphere makes honesty easier. People become more willing to acknowledge what they feel and what they want without embellishment or denial. There is less performance, less need to appear certain when uncertainty is present. This honesty strengthens self-respect. Choices made from truth, even when imperfect, feel cleaner than choices made to impress or avoid discomfort. As honesty deepens, so does discernment. Not everything deserves energy. Not every invitation requires acceptance. Not every opinion needs a response. Appreciation clarifies what already nourishes. Intention clarifies what aligns. Together, they form a natural filter that simplifies life without deprivation. The result is not withdrawal, but selectivity. This selectivity changes how rest is experienced. Rest no longer feels like something earned only after exhaustion. It becomes a legitimate part of rhythm. Because effort is no longer fueled by tension, the body signals fatigue earlier and more clearly. Responding to these signals prevents burnout rather than reacting to it. Over time, vitality becomes steadier rather than cyclical. One of the more profound outcomes of this steadiness is a renewed capacity for awe. Not dramatic or tied to rare events, but quieter, rooted in noticing. Light changing throughout the day, the complexity of a human interaction, the precision of something working as intended. Appreciation sharpens perception enough to notice these details. Intention keeps awareness from drifting away too quickly. Life regains a sense of depth that was always present but rarely seen. This depth also reshapes how meaning is understood. Meaning is no longer something to be discovered in a single calling or achievement. It emerges from coherence, from living in a way where actions, values, and attention are aligned. This coherence creates a sense of integrity that does not depend on external recognition. It feels internally complete, even while still evolving. When challenges arise, as they inevitably do, they are met from this ground. There is less questioning of worth and more curiosity about response. Pain is still felt, but it is less compounded by narrative. Difficulty becomes a moment of engagement rather than a verdict on life's fairness. This does not remove grief or disappointment, but it prevents them from turning into despair. Relationships, at this stage, often become more spacious. There is less pressure to be understood and more willingness to understand. Silence is no longer threatening. Differences are less personal. Appreciation allows people to be seen as they are, not as they should be. Intention allows boundaries to be maintained without hostility. This combination fosters respect, even when closeness fluctuates. There is also a quiet humility that emerges. Not the humility of shrinking, but of realism. An understanding that control is limited, timing is unpredictable, and perspective is always partial. This humility makes learning continuous. Feedback is received without defensiveness. Change is embraced without identity loss. Growth becomes a natural extension of curiosity rather than a correction of flaws. Over time, it becomes clear that what once felt like effortful practice has become orientation. Appreciation no longer needs reminders. Intention no longer needs constant reaffirmation. This familiarity is perhaps the greatest gift. No matter how circumstances shift, there is a way back to clarity that does not depend on external fixes. Attention can always be redirected. Recognition can always be restored. Direction can always be refined. This reliability builds a deep sense of inner security, not the promise that nothing will go wrong, but the confidence that whatever arises can be met. At some point, the idea of magic takes on a quieter meaning. It is no longer about sudden transformation or extraordinary events. It is about responsiveness, about how life seems to open when resistance softens, about how opportunities align when attention is clear, about how meaning deepens when moments are met fully. Nothing supernatural is required, only presence, practiced consistently. And so life continues, not as a destination reached, but as an unfolding relationship. Appreciation keeps the heart open to what is. Intention keeps movement aligned with what matters. Between the two, there is space to live deliberately without rigidity, fully without exhaustion, and honestly without fear. That is where the real shift settles, not in what happens. With time, this way of meeting life becomes so natural that it no longer feels like a philosophy at all. It feels like common sense rediscovered. The mind stops reaching for dramatic explanations or future breakthroughs. There is a quiet acceptance that life is lived only where attention is placed, and that the quality of that attention determines far more than circumstances ever could. In this space, effort and ease are no longer opposites. They coexist. There are days of focus and days of rest, moments of intensity and moments of stillness, all belonging to the same rhythm. Nothing needs to be forced into balance because balance emerges on its own when resistance drops. Appreciation ensures that nothing is dismissed too quickly. Intention ensures that nothing is engaged with blindly. There is also a growing trust in timing. Not the passive kind that waits without action, but the intelligent kind that recognizes when movement is required and when patience is wiser. This trust reduces regret. Even when outcomes are imperfect, there is less self-reproach. Choices are seen as appropriate to the understanding available at the time. This perspective preserves dignity and self-respect. As this trust stabilizes, comparison loses its grip. Other people's paths are no longer threatening or idealized. They are simply different. Success elsewhere does not diminish one's own direction. Failure elsewhere does not become a warning sign. Appreciation brings focus back to what is present. Intention brings focus back to what matters personally. Together, they dissolve the need to measure life against external standards. One of the quiet freedoms that emerges is the freedom to change one's mind. When identity is no longer built on rigid positions, growth feels safe. New information can be integrated without embarrassment. Old beliefs can be released without loss. This flexibility keeps life responsive rather than brittle. It allows reinvention without crisis. Even the idea of purpose begins to soften. Purpose is no longer a single role or destination waiting to be discovered. It is expressed through how attention is given, how choices are made, and how moments are inhabited. Purpose becomes dynamic rather than fixed, adapting as circumstances and understanding evolve. This adaptability is what allows life to remain engaging over time. Stagnation does not come from repetition, but from disengagement. When appreciation keeps perception fresh and intention keeps direction meaningful, even familiar routines carry life within them. The ordinary stops feeling empty. It becomes the primary arena where meaning is practiced. Eventually, the need to explain or justify this way of living fades. There is no urge to convince others or to label the experience. It is enough that life feels coherent from the inside. Peace is not constant happiness, but the absence of constant friction. Joy is not excitement, but alignment. Satisfaction is not arrival, but participation. When difficulties return, as they always will, they are met from this ground. There may still be confusion, grief, or frustration, but there is also orientation, a sense of where to return. Appreciation brings the mind back to what is steady. Intention reestablishes direction when things feel scattered. Together, they act like a compass rather than a solution. This is where the deeper meaning of magic finally settles. Not as something that bypasses effort or reality, but as the transformation that occurs when attention is reclaimed, when life is no longer lived on autopilot, when moments are not rushed through in search of something better, when presence itself becomes enough to change how everything is experienced. Nothing about this requires perfection. Distraction will return. Old habits will resurface. There will be days when appreciation feels distant and intention feels blurred. But now there is recognition. And recognition is enough to begin again, without drama or judgment. Life, seen from here, is no longer a puzzle to solve or a test to pass. It is an ongoing relationship, responsive, unpredictable, and quietly generous to those who meet it with openness. The magic is not something. At this point, there is little left to seek in the usual sense. The hunger that once pushed life forward has been replaced by a steadier, quieter momentum. It is not driven by dissatisfaction, but by interest. Curiosity becomes the new engine. Curiosity about how moments unfold, how people reveal themselves, how inner states shift in response to attention. Life feels less like a race and more like an exploration. This exploration brings with it a refined sensitivity. Small changes in mood or energy are noticed early. Subtle signals from the body and mind are taken seriously rather than ignored. Because of this, course corrections happen sooner and with less disruption. Fatigue is addressed before burnout. Misalignment is acknowledged before resentment builds. Appreciation sharpens awareness. Intention guides response. There is also a growing comfort with not knowing. Questions are allowed to remain open without pressure for immediate answers. This patience creates space for insight to arrive organically rather than being forced. Many realizations come not during effort, but during rest, reflection, or simple presence. Trust in this process reduces mental strain and preserves creative energy. As the need for certainty diminishes, creativity often expands. Without the fear of getting it wrong, experimentation becomes enjoyable. Ideas are explored without immediate attachment to outcome. This playful seriousness leads to unexpected solutions and expressions. Work becomes less about proving competence and more about engaging curiosity. The results often feel more authentic and impactful because they are less constrained by self-consciousness. Relationships, too, benefit from this openness. Expectations soften. People are allowed to be inconsistent, evolving, imperfect. This does not mean tolerating harm, but it does mean releasing the need for others to fulfill specific roles. Appreciation allows connection to be felt even when agreement is absent. Intention maintains self-respect without closing the heart. There is also a deepening sense of responsibility, though not the heavy kind. It is the responsibility of awareness. The understanding that how attention is used matters, not just for personal well-being, but for the emotional climate shared with others. Tone, presence, and responsiveness quietly influence environments. This influence is not about control, but about contribution. At this stage, life feels less fragmented. Past, present, and future are experienced as parts of a continuous process rather than separate compartments. The past informs without imprisoning. The future guides without pressuring. The present becomes the primary point of contact, where both appreciation and intention operate most effectively. There is also a subtle but important shift in how suffering is perceived. Suffering is no longer interpreted as evidence of failure or misalignment. It is seen as part of being alive in a changing world. This perspective does not glorify pain, but it prevents unnecessary self-blame. Compassion naturally extends inward and outward, creating resilience rather than resignation. Over time, this compassion becomes one of the most stable qualities of the inner landscape. Not sentimentality, but understanding. the recognition that everyone is responding to life with the tools they currently have. This recognition softens judgment and reduces reactivity. Conflict, when it arises, is addressed with clarity rather than hostility. What becomes clear here is that appreciation and intention are not techniques to be mastered and discarded. They are ongoing orientations that evolve with experience. Their expression changes, but their essence remains. Appreciation keeps perception open. Intention keeps movement meaningful. Together, they form a quiet discipline that supports a well-lived life. Eventually, the idea of arrival dissolves completely. There is no final state to reach, no permanent clarity to secure. There is only responsiveness, the ability to meet each moment as it comes, informed by awareness and guided by values. This responsiveness feels sufficient. It carries a sense of completeness that does not depend on resolution. From this place, even uncertainty is welcomed as part of the unfolding. It keeps attention alive. It invites humility. It prevents stagnation. Life remains dynamic, not because it is chaotic, but because it is alive. And so the journey continues, not toward something distant, but deeper into what is already here. The magic, once thought to be rare or extraordinary, reveals itself as the ordinary experienced without resistance. Not a secret hidden from most, but a way of seeing available to any. As the journey continues in this quieter, more attentive way, there is a growing sense that life is no longer something to manage tightly. Control loosens without becoming careless. Structure remains, but it is flexible. Plans are made, but they are held lightly. This balance creates a rare form of ease, not the ease of avoidance, but the ease of trust in one's ability to respond. The mind, once busy with constant evaluation, now rests more often in observation. Thoughts are noticed without immediately being believed. Emotions are felt without being dramatized. This does not create distance from life, it creates intimacy with it. Experiences are met directly rather than filtered through stories about what they mean. Presence becomes the default rather than the exception. In this presence, there is a renewed appreciation for effort itself. Effort is no longer seen as proof of struggle, but as participation. Whether learning something new, navigating a difficult conversation, or showing up consistently, effort is valued for what it represents: engagement with life. This reframing removes the bitterness that often accompanies hard work and replaces it with quiet respect. There is also a deepening acceptance of limits. Energy is finite. Attention is selective. Time moves in one direction. Instead of fighting these realities, they are factored in. Choices become more intentional because not everything can be pursued. Letting go becomes an act of wisdom rather than loss. This acceptance creates space for what truly matters to be met fully. As this clarity matures, gratitude extends even to impermanence. Moments are cherished precisely because they pass. Relationships are valued because they evolve. Opportunities are engaged because they are time-bound. Impermanence no longer feels threatening, it feels meaningful. It gives shape to experience and urgency to care. This perspective transforms how endings are experienced. Endings are no longer interpreted solely as failures or closures. They are seen as transitions, often necessary for renewal. There is grief, yes, but also recognition. Appreciation allows what was to be honored. Intention allows what comes next to be approached with openness rather than fear. The sense of self continues to simplify. Labels feel less important. Roles feel less defining. What remains is a stable awareness that moves through different contexts without being consumed by them. This stability does not make life flat. It makes it navigable. There is room for intensity without chaos, and calm without stagnation. One of the quieter joys of this state is the ability to be with others without agenda. Conversations are not used to extract validation or control outcomes. They become exchanges rather than transactions. Listening deepens. Responses slow. People feel met rather than managed. This quality of presence often becomes more impactful than any advice or solution offered. There is also an increasing alignment between inner values and outward behavior. Small inconsistencies are noticed and adjusted without self-criticism. Integrity becomes less about moral perfection and more about coherence. When actions match understanding, energy flows more freely. Life feels less divided. Over time, appreciation and intention merge into something almost wordless. There is simply an orientation toward life that is open, attentive, and engaged. The practices that once felt deliberate now operate beneath conscious effort. They show up in tone, timing, and restraint. They guide when to act and when to wait. At this stage, the idea of struggle begins to dissolve. Challenges remain, but they are no longer framed as battles to win. They are situations to meet, understand, and respond to. This reframing preserves energy and reduces suffering. It allows complexity without overwhelm. Looking back, it becomes clear that nothing external had to change for this transformation to occur. Circumstances may have shifted, but the real change was in relationship, the relationship with thought, with emotion, with time, and with experience itself. Life feels less adversarial and more collaborative. And so the path continues, not toward resolution, but toward deeper participation. Each moment offers another opportunity to notice, to appreciate, to respond with intention. There is no finish line, no final understanding to secure. Only a living, breathing. By now, it becomes clear that what once felt like a method has become a mindset, and what once felt like a mindset has become a way of life. There is no longer a need to remind oneself to be present or appreciative. Awareness arises on its own, especially in moments that once would have passed unnoticed. The ordinary carries a quiet weight, not because it is dramatic, but because it is real. There is a deep comfort in this realism. Expectations soften. Life is no longer required to perform in order to be acceptable. Joy appears in simple alignment rather than peak experiences. Contentment is found not in controlling outcomes, but in participating fully in whatever is unfolding. This does not eliminate ambition or desire, it grounds them. Goals are pursued without losing oneself in them. At this stage, inner life feels less crowded. Thoughts come and go with less friction. Emotional waves rise and fall without being resisted or exaggerated. Even discomfort is met with a kind of patience that was once unavailable. This patience is not indifference. It is strength expressed through steadiness. One of the most notable changes is how attention relates to silence. Silence is no longer something to fill or escape. It becomes restorative. In silence, clarity sharpens. In silence, unresolved questions reorganize themselves. This is where intuition often speaks, not in dramatic insights, but in subtle recognitions that feel obvious only in hindsight. From this clarity, action becomes cleaner. Decisions are made with fewer justifications. There is less internal debate, less second guessing. When mistakes occur, they are acknowledged without collapsing into self-judgment. Learning continues, but without the emotional tax that once accompanied it. This way of being also alters how uncertainty is held. Instead of fearing the unknown, there is curiosity about it. Not naive optimism, but openness. The future is no longer imagined as something that must validate the present. It is allowed to be an extension of it. This perspective removes a great deal of pressure from both planning and performance. Relationships at this point often feel simpler and more honest. There is less need to manage impressions or control outcomes. Care is expressed directly. Boundaries are respected without drama. Differences are tolerated without threat. Connection deepens not because everything is resolved, but because presence replaces expectation. As life continues to unfold, there is a growing sense of humility, not from diminishment, but from perspective. The realization that so much is beyond control, and yet so much can be met with grace. This humility makes room for gratitude that is not dependent on comfort or success. It is rooted in participation itself. Even suffering, when it appears, is approached differently. It is not rushed through or explained away. It is allowed its place without becoming the whole story. This allowance often shortens its duration and deepens its meaning. Pain becomes a teacher rather than a verdict. What remains constant through all of this is a feeling of alignment. Not perfection, not certainty, but coherence. Inner values, outer actions, and present, moment awareness are no longer pulling in different directions. This coherence creates a sense of peace that does not need to be defended. Eventually, the idea of magic becomes almost unnecessary. There is no need for special language to describe what feels natural. Life responds to attention. Experience deepens when it is met fully. Direction clarifies when values are honored. These are no longer insights, they are lived realities. The journey does not end here, but it does settle. There is confidence in the ability to return to presence whenever distraction arises. Appreciation remains available in every moment. Intention remains adjustable as life evolves. Together, they form a steady ground beneath change. As this way of living becomes fully integrated, there is a sense of steadiness that no longer depends on circumstances lining up in a particular way. Life may still feel demanding at times, but it rarely feels overwhelming. There is an underlying confidence that whatever arises can be met with presence rather than panic. This confidence is not loud or performative. It is calm, almost invisible, yet deeply reliable. Attention now rests more naturally in the present, not because the future has lost importance, but because the present has gained authority. Decisions made here feel more grounded. Actions taken here feel more honest. Even when the mind drifts, it returns more easily, without self-criticism. Awareness has become a habit rather than an effort. One of the most meaningful shifts at this stage is the way value is assigned. Worth is no longer measured by productivity alone, nor by approval, nor by constant progress. Moments of stillness carry as much legitimacy as moments of action. Being becomes as meaningful as doing. This rebalancing quietly heals a great deal of internal pressure. there is also a deeper respect for emotional truth. Feelings are not rushed past in the name of positivity. They are allowed to speak, but not allowed to dominate. This balance creates emotional intelligence, the ability to acknowledge inner experience while choosing responses wisely. Over time, this intelligence makes life feel more navigable and less reactive. As appreciation remains steady, perception continues to refine itself. Beauty is noticed where it once would have been ignored. Not because life has become more beautiful, but because attention has become less distracted. This beauty does not demand anything. It simply reminds. It reconnects awareness to the richness of being alive. Intention, now quiet and consistent, operates more like an inner compass than a set of goals. It guides direction without urgency. It corrects course without self-reproach. When motivation dips, it does not panic. It waits, adjusts, and re-engages. This patience preserves energy and prevents burnout. Relationships deepen further in this climate. There is room for complexity, for silence, for difference. Listening becomes more important than convincing. Presence becomes more valuable than performance. Even difficult conversations feel less threatening because self-worth is no longer on the line. There is also a growing sense of contribution, not in the sense of saving or fixing, but in participating meaningfully. Whether through work, care, creativity, or simple presence, there is satisfaction in knowing that one's way of being affects the world. This satisfaction is quiet, but sustaining. At times, reflection reveals how much unnecessary struggle once existed, not because life was harsher, but because resistance was stronger. This recognition does not bring regret. It brings compassion, an understanding that awareness unfolds in stages, and each stage has its own lessons. Even ambition evolves here. It becomes less about personal achievement and more about expression. What wants to move through attention? What feels worth offering? This orientation creates work that feels aligned rather than draining. Effort remains, but it feels purposeful. There is a sense now that nothing essential is missing. This does not mean all desires are fulfilled. It means life feels whole even while evolving. The need for arrival dissolves. The present is no longer a waiting room for something better. When uncertainty appears, it is met with curiosity rather than fear. When change arrives, it is met with flexibility rather than resistance. These responses are not rehearsed. They emerge naturally from the ground that appreciation and intention have created. And so life continues, moment by moment, without the need for constant interpretation. Experience is trusted. Awareness remains engaged. Direction stays fluid. There is no final conclusion to reach, only continued participation. There is a quiet completeness to this stage that is difficult to describe without sounding final, even though nothing has actually ended. Life continues to change, demand, surprise, and challenge. Yet the relationship with all of it has stabilized. There is no longer the feeling of standing outside of life, trying to figure it out before stepping in. Participation is direct now, immediate, honest. What stands out most is the absence of urgency. Not laziness, not indifference, but the absence of that inner pressure that once insisted something essential was missing. Action still happens. Goals are still pursued, but they arise from interest and alignment rather than fear of falling behind. This changes the texture of effort completely. Movement feels chosen, not compelled. Attention has become less scattered over time. It no longer fractures itself across endless worries and imagined futures. When it does drift, it returns gently, almost instinctively. Presence is not held tightly, it is allowed. And because of that, it stays longer. Moments feel fuller, not because they are extraordinary, but because they are actually lived. There is also a refined relationship with thought. Thoughts are no longer treated as commands or verdicts. They are seen as suggestions, reflections, sometimes habits. This creates space. In that space, choice becomes possible. Responses become deliberate. Silence between thoughts becomes familiar rather than uncomfortable. From this silence, a deeper sense of knowing emerges. Not certainty about outcomes, but clarity about direction. What matters feels obvious. What doesn't quietly fades. This simplicity is not imposed. It reveals itself when attention is no longer consumed by noise. Emotionally, there is greater range without instability. Joy is felt without clinging. Sadness is allowed without collapse. Frustration passes without turning into identity. This emotional maturity is not dramatic. It is practical. It allows life to be felt without being overwhelming. There is also a gentle acceptance of human limitation. Energy fluctuates. Focus comes and goes. Mistakes still happen. None of this threatens self worth anymore. It is understood as part of being alive. This understanding brings kindness, not as an ideal, but as a default response to oneself and others. Relationships reflect this shift clearly. There is less projection, less expectation, less silent negotiation. Care is offered without keeping score. Distance, when it appears, is not immediately interpreted as failure. Connection feels more honest because it is less controlled. Time itself feels different. Days are not merely units to be filled or endured. They are lived sequences of moments, each one carrying its own tone. The past no longer dominates attention. The future no longer demands constant rehearsal. The present holds enough to be engaging. At this point, there is no need to label the experience or explain it. It does not need validation. It works because it is lived. Appreciation continues quietly, not as an exercise, but as recognition. Intention continues softly, not as pressure, but as orientation. What remains is a steady willingness to meet life as it is, again and again. To notice when resistance appears and soften it. To notice when direction blurs and realign it. This willingness is the true continuity beneath all change. There is no promise here of perfect peace or permanent clarity. What exists instead is reliability, the reliability of returning to awareness, to presence, to choice. That is enough. And so the journey does not conclude. It simply continues, lighter now, less burdened by the need to arrive somewhere else. Life unfolds, moment by moment, met with attention, guided by intention, and by now, it feels natural to say that nothing is being added to life anymore. Instead, things have been gently removed. Layers of urgency, tension, and unnecessary struggle have fallen away, not through force, but through understanding. What remains is not emptiness, but clarity. Life feels lighter because it is no longer being carried against itself. There is a deep familiarity with the present moment. It no longer feels like a narrow point between past and future, but like a living field where experience unfolds. Attention rests here not out of discipline, but because it has learned that this is where life actually happens. Everything meaningful arises here, passes through here, and is known here. This familiarity creates a quiet confidence. Not confidence in outcomes, but confidence in engagement. Whatever appears can be met. Whatever is felt can be allowed. Whatever is needed can be considered. This confidence is subtle, yet it changes the tone of everyday life. Decisions feel cleaner. Reactions are less defensive. Recovery from difficulty is faster. Thoughts now function more like tools than identities. They are picked up when useful and set down when not. Even self-reflection is lighter. There is less obsession with improvement and more curiosity about alignment. Growth continues, but without self-judgment driving it. Learning becomes enjoyable rather than corrective. Emotionally, there is a sense of flow. Feelings move through without obstruction. They inform, but they do not dominate. This allows for a deeper experience of joy, because joy is not overshadowed by fear of loss. It also allows for a healthier experience of grief, because grief is not resisted or dramatized. Both are welcomed as part of the human range. The body, too, is listened to more carefully. Signals are noticed earlier. Rest is respected. Movement is chosen with awareness. This attentiveness does not come from anxiety about health, but from appreciation for what supports vitality. The body is treated less like a machine to manage and more like a partner in experience. Relationships now feel less like projects and more like encounters. Each interaction is allowed to be what it is, without heavy expectation. This creates more honesty, even when things are imperfect. Care flows more freely because it is not entangled with fear of outcome. There is also a growing sense of gratitude that is not tied to circumstances. It is not dependent on good news or favorable conditions. It comes from the simple recognition of being here, aware, and able to respond. This form of gratitude is steady. It does not spike or fade dramatically. It underlies experience quietly. Intention, at this stage, is almost invisible. It no longer announces itself or demands focus. It is embedded in choices, tone, and timing. Life moves in a general direction without being pushed. Adjustments happen naturally when alignment shifts. There is trust in this process. What becomes clear is that effort has not disappeared, but struggle has. Challenges still require attention and action, but they no longer feel personal or punitive. They are simply part of participation. This distinction preserves energy and prevents cynicism. The need for explanation also fades. Life does not have to make sense in a grand narrative to be lived meaningfully. Meaning is found in engagement, not interpretation. Moments are sufficient on their own. As this understanding stabilizes, there is less interest in chasing extraordinary experiences. Not because they are rejected, but because ordinary moments have regained their depth. A conversation, a walk, a task done with care, these carry enough richness when attention is present. At this point, the idea of magic feels almost misleading. There is nothing mysterious or hidden anymore. What once seemed elusive was simply unattended. When attention returns, life reveals itself as responsive, textured, and quietly supportive. Nothing needs to be concluded. Nothing needs to be added. Life continues, met as it is, lived from the inside rather than observed from a distance. And there is a sense now that life no longer needs to be interpreted before it can be lived. Experience arrives, and it is met directly, without the habitual pause of judgment or analysis. This immediacy brings a kind of freshness that does not fade with repetition. Even familiar days carry subtle variation when attention is present. Nothing feels wasted, because nothing is overlooked. At this stage, awareness feels embodied rather than conceptual. It is not something happening only in thought, but something felt through posture, breath, and movement. The body becomes a reliable anchor to the present. Tension is noticed sooner. Ease is allowed to spread when it appears. This embodied presence creates a sense of grounding that words rarely capture. Because of this grounding, reactions soften further. There is less reflexive defense, less urge to explain or correct. Silence is allowed to do more of the work. When speech arises, it tends to be clearer and more intentional. Communication becomes less about winning understanding and more about offering it. There is also a growing respect for simplicity. Complexity is no longer equated with depth. Often, the simplest response is the most aligned. This simplicity is not naive, it is distilled. It comes from seeing clearly what matters and letting the rest fall away. Life feels less cluttered, internally and externally. Time pressure continues to ease. Even when schedules are full, there is less psychological rush. Doing one thing at a time becomes natural rather than forced. Attention is given where it is needed, then released. This reduces fatigue and increases effectiveness without requiring more effort. At this level, appreciation becomes almost indistinguishable from awareness itself. To notice something fully is already to value it. There is no separate act of gratitude required. Recognition and appreciation merge into a single movement of attention. This gives daily life a quiet warmth that does not depend on mood. Intention, likewise, becomes synonymous with integrity. Choices reflect values without constant deliberation. There is less inner negotiation because direction is clearer. When uncertainty appears, it is met with patience rather than anxiety. Waiting feels purposeful rather than empty. Even challenges take on a different tone. They are met as invitations to engage rather than obstacles to remove. Effort is applied where it matters, and withheld where it would only create friction. This discernment conserves energy and builds trust in one's own responsiveness. There is also a deepening sense of connectedness. Not as a concept, but as lived experience. Actions ripple outward. Tone influences atmosphere. Presence affects others in ways that are subtle but real. This awareness encourages care without burden. Responsibility is felt, but it is not heavy. Identity continues to loosen. There is less attachment to being a certain way. Adaptation feels natural. Growth does not threaten stability because stability is no longer built on fixed definitions. This flexibility allows life to remain dynamic without becoming chaotic. What remains constant is a sense of participation. Life is no longer something happening elsewhere, to someone else, or for some future version of oneself. It is happening now, and involvement is direct. This involvement carries its own satisfaction. There is no sense of having reached a summit. Instead, there is the feeling of having learned how to walk the terrain. Slopes still rise and fall, weather still changes, but orientation is steady. One knows how to move, when to rest, and when to adjust. As everything continues to unfold, there is gratitude not for perfection, but for access to awareness, to choice, to responsiveness. This access is always available. It is never earned or revoked. It is simply noticed or forgotten. And in noticing it again, by this point, the experience of life feels settled in a way that is both grounded and open. There is no sense of completion, yet there is no restlessness either. The need to arrive somewhere else has dissolved, replaced by a steady engagement with what is already here. Life feels inhabitable, as though one has finally learned how to live inside it rather than alongside it. Awareness now moves with ease between inner and outer experience. Thoughts, emotions, and sensations are noticed without being tangled together. This separation creates clarity. A difficult feeling can be felt without becoming a story. A challenging situation can be addressed without becoming a personal threat. This clarity makes response more skillful and less reactive. There is also a noticeable reduction in self-consciousness. Attention is no longer constantly turned inward to monitor performance or image. It flows outward naturally, toward what is happening. This outward attention deepens connection, improves listening, and brings a sense of natural confidence that does not depend on affirmation. Effort, at this stage, feels cleaner. When work is required, it is done with focus. When rest is needed, it is taken without guilt. This rhythm is not imposed, it is sensed. The body and mind communicate more clearly, and their signals are trusted. Fatigue is respected. Energy is conserved. Gratitude has become so integrated that it rarely registers as a separate feeling. It is embedded in how moments are met. There is appreciation for function, for process, for small supports that make life workable. This appreciation is quiet and continuous, like a background current rather than a wave. Intention has similarly matured into alignment. Choices reflect values with little inner debate. When misalignment appears, it is corrected gently rather than punished. This allows life to self-adjust without accumulating resentment or shame. There is also a growing tolerance for complexity. Situations no longer need to be simplified prematurely. Contradictions can be held. Uncertainty can be lived with. This tolerance prevents rigid thinking and keeps perspective flexible. Life feels more honest because it is allowed to be nuanced. Relationships continue to evolve in this space. There is less pressure to define or secure them. Care is expressed without clinging. Distance is allowed without fear. Presence becomes the primary gift offered. And it is often enough. The sense of time continues to soften. Days are experienced more fully, but with less urgency. Planning still happens, but it does not overshadow the present. The future is respected, not worshipped. The past is remembered, not relived. At this stage, there is little interest in self-improvement as a project. Growth continues naturally through engagement. Learning arises from curiosity rather than inadequacy. This shift removes much of the friction that once made change feel exhausting. Even ambition has found a more grounded expression. It is no longer about reaching a higher status or proving worth. It is about contributing meaningfully, expressing capability, and responding to what feels alive. This form of ambition is sustainable because it is aligned. There is an underlying sense of sufficiency now. Not that everything is perfect, but that life is workable. Challenges can be met. Joy can be felt. Loss can be survived. This sufficiency creates resilience that is quiet but deep. Nothing about this state is dramatic. It would be easy to overlook from the outside. But from the inside, it feels like relief. Like no longer fighting oneself or the flow of experience. Life continues, as it always has. But it is met differently now, with steadiness, clarity, and a willingness to be present for whatever comes next.